Welcome back to the Shepherd's Pie, a slice of faith for our messy lives. I'm Tony Kolenc, a speaker, law professor, and the author of inspirational fiction for teens and adults. Very excited to announce the release of book 2 in my Incarnate series. It's called Begotten from Chrism Press. That's going to be coming out in February. And of course, you can find any information about any of my novels on my website, antonykolenc.com. But today, I'll be speaking with Mitchell Karnes about surviving abuse. My guest today is Mitchell Karnes, the author of 7 novels, including the Abbey Rhodes mystery series and his latest release entitled The Least of These. Mitchell is a retired pastor, school teacher, as well as a Christian husband, father, and grandfather. He uses his experiences and insights as a minister, counselor, and educator to write and speak on relevant issues, including the issue of abuse, which we'll be talking about today. And he lives in Tennessee. Mitchell, welcome to the Shepherd's Pie.
Well, thank you for having me.
So it sounds like you've done a lot of really cool stuff in your life before, or maybe while you've been a writer. So maybe just fill us in a little bit more on your life journey.
Started writing when I was in 6th grade, and the love for it. And of course, that has grown. Hopefully, my talent has grown with it. But I started off in the college thinking I was going to be a lawyer. I was going to go into corporate law. I took my first 2 pre-law classes and decided against that. And so I transferred, and I ended up with an English major and a music business minor. Haven't done really anything with that. And then later on, felt the call to seminary and got my master's in seminary, Christian education. Got invited to come back to Belmont in Nashville and get a Master of Education as well. So to do that, to teach English. And then I finally got another master's in counseling. But then I kept getting sick and found out that I had lymphoma. Went on through that, taught 3 more years and got it again and had to go through the stem cell process, which was it's brutal. The side effects of that, found out that I couldn't maintain that energy that I needed to teach high school. Also what I felt like I needed to do as a pastor. And so work with a family business. We are a payroll service. Put a lot more time into my writing and got books out, and just perfect timing for everything on that.
Tell us a little bit about the different kinds of novels you have out there.
The first 4 I have is a young adult fantasy series. I used to play Dungeons and Dragons and had a very shocking, traumatic experience with that when one of the players, we killed off his character and he took that as killing off him. And so he threatened to shoot us. And that was really the last time that we had played. And so that is the prequel to that series. It's a quadology with the prequel counted. And it's about them gathering together as a reunion and getting into the game. I also wrote a standalone book on an assassin here in Nashville, just built that around there. And, a person who pushes emotions back and found out that his parents, the lie he had been told all of his life, that they had died in a car wreck, wasn't true, but someone he had been working with for the last 30 years was the killer. And so as he seeks his revenge, he finally meets a Christian lady, and with that relationship starts to have a conscience, which you can't have in his business. So as the mystery is solved, he's at that juncture where, can I take the revenge? Will it mean anything? And how do I do that? And so that was called Crossing the Line originally, and I re-released it as Scales of Justice. And then I came and wrote this with the Abbey Rhodes series.
And how many books are going to be in this Abbey Rhodes series?
The contract that I did was a minimum of 6. And so I have this story arc of her redemption story with God and with the church and her past. And so I didn't want to do that in less than 6 books. But it's something that it took, 24 years to build this trauma and ingrain it in her, where she puts up those walls. She tries to deal with her abuse and her anxiety and her depression, all in a personal way and not in a professional way and not in a therapeutic way. And so I figured it would take 6 of these cases, and each case triggers one piece of her past that she has to deal with. And so on this, the overall theme is own the truth or the truth will own you. So if you keep trying to suppress that and run away from it, it owns everything that you do and every part of you.
I love your taglines. You really, have got it down to the very kernel. Like you can just boom, yes, I get it. I see what you're doing there. All right, so it sounds like this is actually a great segue into our topic for the episode. But maybe tell us a little bit about Abbey Rhodes and her background, and kind of maybe even why you designed her that way as an author.
Well, a lot of things just kind of come to me and then I sort through it. So I can credit God with all that and the creativity. But have her growing up in Guatemala in Central America, where they were in Honduras first, as she was a young child, and then in Guatemala is what she remembers. But her father is a missionary, but he is very, very strict. He is God's wrath person, not God's grace. And so she grew up in that where nothing she did was good enough. And then to top it off, her sister, who's 10 years older, that was the perfect child, the one that does everything to the father, the people pleaser. And so when she is raped, she comes back to say that, but the person who raped her is a minister. And so her father can't imagine a minister doing that to her, one of the traveling ones that came in. And so he accuses her of throwing herself at the man, of being provocative, of trying to seduce him. And so he kicks her out of the home at 14 to survive on the streets of Guatemala, to find her food, to find her shelter, and then people taking advantage of this well-developed 14-year-old girl and what she has to do to make money just to eat. All of that thrown in, and that builds on her relationship with how she feels about God, how she feels about the church, how she feels about herself, and how she feels about men. And so that plays through everything that she does as a detective later on.
Wow, that's quite a backstory. Did you have any inspirations for her character, for the backstory that you created?
Yeah, bits and pieces. As you teach high school English, you realize those kids don't come into your class in a vacuum. They come in with their baggage, their traumas. I had been a youth minister for so many years before I started teaching. Try and connect on that level with them and see more beyond teaching them English, but teaching the child. So, one of my mentors said, you don't teach English, you teach English to people, you teach people. Remember that. And so that's always been on my back of my mind. That plus being a pastor and seeing how many people who had been hurt somewhere along the line by someone in the church, someone speaking on behalf of God or speaking on behalf of the church that did this incredible harm to them. And cast them out in certain ways. Sometimes they just ran away and it's all a misunderstanding. Sometimes it was real. Based parts of the story on what happened in St. Louis when I was in seminary, and a youth minister had taken advantage of many of the girls in his ministry. He was charming, he was this, and each one of them, the thing they kept saying is they thought they were special. He made them feel like they were special. Well, he sexually abused them. And so that plays into Watergrave, and that triggers Abby's past. So she's got to investigate this issue while she's dealing with her own baggage. And she comes in with prejudice. She comes in, it happens in a church. The pastor's found dead in the baptistry. And so she's automatically assuming someone in the church did it because that's what she feels about the people. And so she's got to take that step back, let the facts lead to her. But she gets triggered by a lot of this. She has PTSD and her abuse. And so everything I've done, listened to and dealt with as a pastor, as a counselor, and as a teacher, all kind of pieces that one person together.
Wow, sounds very realistic. And you mentioned you have an arc for her, and a redemption arc, if
Mhm.
you
Yes.
will. And I'm assuming this is the kind of redemption arc that we would hope people who are the victims of abuse can eventually reach in their lives. Can you talk a little bit more about that arc?
When I was in counseling, they had, the three sides of counseling. You have the affective, which is dealing with the heart and the emotions. You have the cognitive, which is dealing with how you think, and then the behavioral. And of course, when you're reading that and going through the school, it's amazing how each of those sides, those people were convinced that theirs was the the only way or the best way. And then later on, we have what's called, cognitive behavioral theory, which is starting to combine things. And so what I found is coming from seminary into that, I felt like they were missing that one piece. when Jesus said, love the Lord your God, love with your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength. And so the soul is that spirit that psychology seemed to be leaving out. And so to minister to the whole person or to deal with the whole person, you've got to take all of those facets. And so those four sides, and if they're not in balance, what happens is it topples. You can be great behaviorally and still not deal with the baggage in your brain. You can deal with all that and not, push your emotions aside, which is what Abbey has done. But all of those things they have to deal with. You have to deal with how you think, and that most of the people in abuse end up going and blaming themselves. And so you go to that cognitive and get rid of those tapes that they keep playing. And for her, there was tapes from her father who called her a Jezebel, who called her, all of these things that defined her. She let him define her. And so over those 6 books, that story arc, I want to show that there are people in the church who are genuine, who love and who live that example of Jesus Christ. Yes, there is right and wrong, but there's a way to love people through that.
So it sounds like the kind of an arc that is pretty realistic, and it's I'm sure that over your course of being a counselor and a pastor, that you had to counsel people on this. Many of us suffer abuse in different ways, but
Mhm.
the abuse that you've kind of referred to here, often sexual or emotional abuse, physical abuse, what are some of the things that people can do to try to get past those traumatic events in their lives?
Well, the one thing they can't do is just hide it and keep it enclosed and think it's going to go away. What happens is like that raisin in the sun, that poem, it festers, it becomes worse, and sometimes it even explodes or implodes. The one thing you have to do, especially as a counselor, is to build that relationship. You can't come in to someone who has been putting walls up and putting on a facade all their life and think you're going to change them in 2 sessions, 5 sessions, 10 sessions. And you've got to get past those facades. There's a great commercial with, I don't know what the drug it's for, but the people hold up that smiley face in front of them. And that's, symbolic of what these people are doing while they're suffering from abuse. You've got to build the trust. You have to take time and consider that it took, 24, 34 years to get this way. It may take 5 years, 10 years to come out of that. And so taking the time, building the rapport, and listening sometimes to what's behind what they say, where the hurt is coming. Sarcasm is a great deflector. People use sarcasm a lot and they are, come off as funny, but what if you hear behind that sarcasm is the real thoughts and the real pain sometimes that they're dealing with. And so not just brushing it off, but taking that time, listening to them. And thankfully, in Abby's story arc, I end up putting 2 people in her life who are listeners, who give her the time and give her the respect, and she trusts them and starts to share some of these things.
Beautiful. And we could talk more on that. But I'm interested also in the faith aspect of this
Okay.
because, as you mentioned, both in your fictional story, but in the real world, we too often are dealing with scandals within the church. Protestants, Catholics, we are all having to deal with the aftermath when somebody who's supposed to be a person of faith takes advantage and is
Mhm.
the predator. It's very scandalous, and people could lose their faith over that. So I'm wondering if you could talk to that for a second. How do we view this through the eyes of faith, and how do people not lose their faith when these kinds of traumas happen to them or people they love?
That's really my target audience, those who have been hurt and left, because I have family members that have been in that case. I was a pastor. Well, unfortunately, my family gets to see some of those behind the scene things, the handful of people in a large church that are so petty and lash out and hurt. And so that emotional side, obviously, the mental side, obviously, in there too, but there's that spiritual thing where who do they blame for that? Do they blame just those people? Do they blame the church? Do they blame God? And for those individuals who are in a position of trust, like a pastor, counselor, a youth minister, where they have taken the facades off and trusted this person and gotten taken advantage of, that's so, so hard. We've got to bathe this in prayer. Sometimes we think as prayer is oh yeah, at the end, I'm going to add a prayer to that, but prayer should bathe all of it. praying to God to let us know what to say and when to say, and there are things not to say at all. We can't give those trite answers. My pet peeve about going to funerals is hearing someone who's lost a child and someone comes up and says, "Well, God needed another angel." Okay, it's God's fault then. God just took them. They're meaning well, but it doesn't come off well. And so that's where the patience and a lot of education, a lot of, and education doesn't mean having to go to a school. Education can be learning from your mistakes, learning from a mentor, learning from just observing somebody. To be honest, that we don't have all the answers. I think the people that say they do, they end up doing more harm than good.
Yeah, that's so true. In your story arc, again, with Abbey Rhodes, what is it that brings her to recognize she needs to own the truth? And is that how you see it commonly happen with people who start to deal with the truth that they've suffered in their lives?
Yeah, but for Abby, as she's doing the investigation about the pastor, she ends up coming to the conclusion with why would anybody want to kill this guy? She can imagine someone wanting to kill her father, but someone who loved, who sacrificed, who did everything he could. But when that happens, as we've been in church before, people don't like change. And so here comes a young man who, in order to reach the community, he has to change the way they were doing things. And so ultimately, he gets a lot of criticism for that. And so she assumes that's going to be the person who's the murderer, but it's not. They were just dealing with their pain and the way they think that God wanted to run the church. And so Abby has that. She ends up befriending the widow, and the widow ends up being the sister she hoped she would have had. She gets to hear things. And of course, as they say in counseling, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Because once you open those floodgates that you've been holding down for so many years, it's going to be ugly when that comes out.
Yeah. And you touched on this a little bit earlier too, but maybe you can expand on it a little bit. What kind of words of advice do you have to people who they might not be the victims of abuse themselves, but they meet somebody or somebody in their family has, and they're not sure how to even relate to that person, especially, on that issue. Like you said, you could be well intentioned and say some really bad things in the process. Do you have any advice for those kinds of folks who are like, how do I handle somebody close to me who is a survivor of abuse?
Yeah, and let me tell you the story where I failed and learned this lesson. We had friends who were pregnant with twins, and then about, I think, 6 or 7 months into the process, they died. She had to go through the 9 months and have them birth them, knowing that they were both dead, and then to this funeral. And what I made the mistake of, since I didn't know what to say, was not saying anything. And I learned, I think it was about 5 years after that, in talking with them, is just, a lot of people did that. They didn't know what to say. There were those who said something really trite, trying to help, but there were a lot of people that just avoided them because they didn't know what to say. She goes, all I needed was a hug. All I needed was someone to say, I'm here. I don't understand it either, but I'm here. And so for these people that are hurting, being available, you don't have to have the answers, but your presence can do a world of good if you just be with them and be present with them and listen to them and be there when they break down, be there when they have a question.
And then maybe just sort of a related type question. If somebody themselves who's listening, is one of those people who has had hidden abuse they never really have been able to face, and maybe they realize they need to face it, but they're not sure how to do it. Any advice to them?
First thing I would say is it wasn't your fault. Don't blame yourself. You were taken advantage of, that person, but that person isn't identified as everyone. Everyone doesn't feel that way about you. People want to help you. People, there are people who can identify with you who are in that same place. But find someone that you trust. Find someone who's not going to criticize you or judge you for that, but you've got to share that load because a burden shared is cut in half. And so you carry all that on yourself, but there are people out there who want to help and want to share that with you.
And I'm sure that that's true. And even if it's their pastor or their priest or youth minister, whoever, there are definitely people out there. So Is that ultimately what happens with your main character? She finally finds the person she can share that with?
She does. And then once they get too close for her comfort, she pushes them away again. And so she has to go through this hills and valleys, hills and valleys. But like kind of like the stock market goes, it's up here, then it has a valley, then it goes a little higher, then it goes a valley. So you are making progress. And I remember one of my favorite classes, illustration the professor gave. He pointed to one corner of the room. He says, "Here's where you are with your problem." Pointed to the other corner, which was way over there. He says, "That's your solution." And he took one step from your problem. He says, "That's progress." Sometimes we feel like we have failed if we don't get all of this way. But just to move someone out of that initial problem, to talk about it, that's progress. And we move on different paces. Some people can move through these things rapidly. Some people, it takes a long time, and some people go and then they have to take 3 steps back and start over. And that's okay. That's not failure. Failure is when you give up.
Now, something that every author would love to hear is that a book that they've written, a series they've written, something they care dearly about and that has deep messages that could help people is going to be made into a movie. And I understand that you actually may have that kind of news with relation to Abbey Rhodes. Can you talk to that for a minute?
Yeah, Watergrave is going to be a streaming series, and it's going to be come out in the theaters locally first for the pilot, and so it'll be divided into four sections, that one larger one and three shorter ones, and they're hoping that the series will just continue. The publisher that's doing with us, he's hoping that they'll at least take those, that story arc and finish that story arc. So for me, that would be 6 books, two a year, to be able to share with somebody. I've already seen people who are identifying with Abby. They haven't gotten very far, but they understand where she's coming from, and they're glad that I was that honest. And when I was pitching this, I had the hardest time because I had the secular world saying I'm too Christian, the Christian world saying I'm too edgy or too secular, and they didn't want to deal with that mess. After 25 rejections, I got an agent who would take it on. She saw something in it. And then she went through, Christian publishing houses that kept turning us down for that same reason, and finally found Mike Parker at Wordcrafts. And he says, I've been looking for someone willing to tackle that niche between the secular and the Pollyanna Christian.
Well, congratulations on that. I know, of course, it's always the grace of God that we have to
Absolutely.
attribute that to. So, if folks are really interested now in this series, in more about you and your work, where would you like them to go to get their hands on this stuff?
They can go to my website. It's Mitchell S. Karnes, that's Karnes with a K, author.com. The other one is just Mitchell S. Karnes at Gmail. They can just email me directly.
Wonderful. So, you're working on these projects clearly going to be for years to come as you keep moving through this series. Any other parting word?
To those who want to be authors out there or want to write. I'm 62, about to turn 63. I've had this dream since sixth grade. I've had what I thought was going to happen and didn't, and got the disappointments. I've had, minor successes, and you've got to keep at it. If God's giving you a story to tell, then there's a good chance that someone out there needs to hear it. And if you quit before you get it out there, they won't get that opportunity. So stick with it, go through all the ups and downs, find some people around you, writers group or whatever, just to keep encouraging you to do that.
That is great advice. I totally share that. And I agree, right? Each of us, I believe, God has a special mission for us, and there's something that only we can say, the certain way we can say it based on our own life experiences. And yeah, there's nothing new under the sun, maybe, but each of us kind of has a unique way that we can share whatever the message is that, we really feel in our hearts needs to get out there.
Absolutely.
So thank you for being out there and sharing on a difficult topic that, like you said, I'm sure a lot of people want to stay away from it, but there's too many people hurting, and we need more novels that will broach those types of subjects. Thank you so much for coming on the Shepherd's Pie and sharing all that with us today.
I do appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for the show today. We've been speaking with Mitchell Karnes again about their faith and surviving abuse. Again, this is Antony Barone Kolenc. Definitely check out my website, antonykolenc.com. But until next time, may God bless us as we rely on our faith to work through the messy challenges of our lives.